Hi, it's David Shummy, and I'm here with members of the Framers Club today and some other invited guests to have a little bit of a look at a few little mapboard techniques. I also just wanted to welcome, we have a couple of new members, Mariana from Brazil, who will shortly be doing some training on Valiani computerized cutter, which we're going to take through some things, and we'll be recording a few of those things, and they'll come through to you guys also as some bonus content. Even though you may not use computerized cutter, some of the design capabilities and some of the design techniques that we'll use in that training may also be good for you guys. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. We're broadcasting today using YouTube Live, and what we've got, there's a little settings bar down, it's the little star-shaped thing. If you want to increase your bandwidth, you can set that to high definition, like to 720p, which is usually the highest that we can get out on the bandwidth that we've got here. The other thing, if anybody's listening, if you'd like to just pop into the chat that you can hear me, that's great, because I can't always see what's coming from the other end, and it's good to know that you're receiving it loud and clear. We also, if we drop out today, if we ever drop out on the internet, this is being recorded. It is backed up both on a high definition camera and a little GoPro on the ceiling, and also we usually have a little close-up camera that we use as well. Now, again, a little bit of housekeeping. In the Framers Club membership site, we have had the replay links posted in the live section, and I always thought that my graphic guy Fabio was uploading the edited versions, because we have actually edited up all of the past content, and he thought I was uploading it and swapping the links over, but we both were at cross purposes. So over this last about the last 5 days, it was just brought to my attention that you weren't getting those high def copies. So what we've been doing is we've been uploading them. It's been taking a little bit of a while because the big file sizes of the full resolution edited copies show up, or they take up a lot of bandwidth, and so we upload about, at the moment, possibly 2 videos a day, and they're all going to have the links replaced in that live section. So when you go back in, like, you can always pick up the replays of this. If you've got an email with the replay link, you can go and watch it at the replay. But later on, if you want to watch the edited version where we've actually zoomed in and got the close-ups and other technical parts, you should be able to pick them up really shortly from inside the members area underneath the live broadcasts. So thanks, Peter. Peter's just typed in there that he can hear me, which is great. So what a lot of people watch us also on replay, because we've got people all over the world that come to watch these things, and sometimes we have a ton of you on live and a ton of you watching replay. So even if you're watching on replay, if you've got any questions, I do get the questions. The questions come through to me and come through to my email if I'm not actually answering them while we're live. Anyway, today we're here to look at some fabric wrapping of mapboard. And fabric wrap mapboards can be used to emulate some of the fabric or suede boards that you might be able to buy. Sometimes it's more economical to make your own, and also you can then get a different finish that may not be available in the commercial ranges of fabric boards. A lot of the suppliers, they have incredible range of mat and mount boards today. So you should be able to use something from there, but often you'd find people wanting a colour that may not be available, in which case, if you can find a fabric or even a paper, or even in some cases we've printed boards to match colours that have been required. So what I wanted to look at is just three things today, which was involving a couple of things. One was using pinwheel extensions. Now, pinwheel extension is to make a wider bevel, and it's a technique that you can use with both coloured boards or some of the wrapped bevel boards that you might see out there. There are commercial products that have that bevel. I also wanted to look at how we apply, or one method that we use to apply fabric to a board. Some people do different things, but we're going to do something here fairly low tech so that you guys can copy that if you need to. And then, time permitting, I want to show you a little method of making a traditional watercolour mat board. In the old days, they would use, to try and get, in some circumstances where they were trying to make a beveled window, they may not have had access to a bevel cutter. And so there are a couple of times I've seen boards created by using 2 layers of board together, and they'd stretch a piece of watercolour paper between the gap. And what this gave was sort of like quite a gentle bevel. I mean, it depended on, obviously, on how far apart you had the boards or how wide you'd make the step. But they're really quite elegant because you could have, unlike our normal little sharp 45-degree bevels that we have with traditional mat boards that we use now, these would have a really shallow, like, 15 or 20 degree angle, and really just lead right into the work, and sort of had just this gentle look to them. So I'm going to try and copy one of those for you today. It's something that we've used on occasion when we've had to replace or replicate old mats off old watercolours, and the owner has wanted the border to look the same as the original. So we'll have a look at that last. So anyway, today what we've got, I'm using some little hand tools. I've just got a couple of knives. We've just got some Stanley knives, and we've got them loaded with, actually these are the KDS. They're a Japanese hardened steel blade. Keep your eyes out for them if you're doing a lot of cutting. These are more of a carbon steel blade than your normal snap-off blades. They tend to last a lot better, and they're a lot sharper. So we generally will use those for most of our cutting now, because we just get such better results. I've just got a little handheld Foamworks cutter, but the beveling that I'm going to show you today, you could use a normal mat cutter for, or if you've got a big mat board cutter, computerized machine, you can use those, or you can just use your straight line mat cutter. But I will be attempting some of the work with just a little handheld tool, because that's going to be easy. I do have my anti-static roller, but I'm not going to be using this for the anti-static properties today. I'm going to use this just to be applying pressure to one of the boards when we've mounted some fabric onto it. I've also got a little bit of double-sided tape, which I may or may not use just to hold parts of the fabric on the back of the board. And the glue that we're using today, this is an EVA glue. It's a different product to PVA. PVA is what we often use for gluing our picture frames together, but EVA glues are they're great for mounting products on difficult surfaces. So if you had to glue down canvas or fabric or something, or even actually this is one of the few glues that glues gloss laminate to, say, MDF boards and things like that. So in some of the block mounting examples, which is economical mounting methods, EVA is quite a useful adhesive to have. So we'll be using some EVA glue today, and we're also going to just be using a little foam paint roller and a little tray. So we'll get into using those in a minute. I just want to check one quick thing before we move on. I'm going to switch the camera over just to the above angle, because I want to check that we've got it before we get into actually mounting. So this is occasionally we drop out when we do this, so I just want to check this before we go, and bear with me if we lose the feed. I'll just flick over quickly. Yeah, so generally you can see down on the work surface that I'll be working on here. You can see some of the mat boards. I've actually chosen a sort of a grey, because the white, although it looks quite white on screen to me, it's a grey, and these are some little ivory ones that we're going to use with the watercolour paper, and an oval one later on. So first up, what we're going to do, we're going to have a little look at, I'll just flick back over, we're going to have a little look at, first of all, extending our mount board. So I've pre-cut haven't got anything in mind, but I've just pre-cut a board. It's about 450 by 350 millimeters, and I've cut that with a normal bevel on it. Now that's just a standard mount board, which is 1.3 millimeters thick. Now occasionally you might have seen, and this is a technique that you can use to build wide bevels. You can buy thick mount board, up to 12 ply thick, and some of those thick ones, they're incredibly expensive and they're quite tricky to actually to cut. You know, they can be difficult to cut. So you can use other mount boards themselves or mat boards themselves to extend the thickness. So if you're using like a white cord board and you have just plain white mat boards, you can actually use this technique by using layers of normal boards to make up a fat bevel board. Or in this example that I'm going to show you first, before we actually put any fabric on here, I'm going to use some 3mm foam board, and I've got a few little pieces here. And what I'd done just before I came on was I'd beveled some of these edges of the board on my big mat cutting machine, but we could use our little handheld cutter to do the same thing. But I just wanted to cut some strips so to make it a little bit quicker when I'm demonstrating today. I will still be using this other trimmer to cut the ends of it. Now, if I can explain, what I've done here is I've beveled one edge of the foam board, and on the other end I've also cut a bevel at a 90-degree angle. And in fact, that's something that I'm going to need today to make sure that I cut it at that 90 degrees. I might even need to run and grab a square if I don't have one up the front, but we'll see how we go. So what I've done is I've just beveled some boards, and I'm going to use this first of all to make this mount board thicker. And I'll come down onto the overhead, and so maybe we can see just a little bit of how this is going to fit, because I can probably do a little bit of a close-up on this one. So what's going to happen is on this board itself, where I've actually beveled it, I'll hold it up to the camera there. We've got a little bit of a beveled edge down that edge there, and that beveled edge, and also on the top, I've beveled that edge too. And where that's going to go is we're going to use that bevel inside by putting it inside this other mount board, and we're going to stick it up against the inside edge of that board there. Now I'm just going to stick this on with double-sided tape. I'm just going to stick one piece on, and I'll explain how the extension works, because this is a fairly basic technique that you can use if you want to make boards thicker. And before we put the fabric on, in this case, I just wanted a thicker one so that we could have a little bit more of a beveled edge for the fabric to roll around. So that's just double-sided tape I've just put on there. And then I've inverted a bevel on the end. So we've got our normal bevel, and that's what's going to lead into the picture. And then I've cut in reverse a little beveled edge on the end there that will just come down into the picture itself. And so on the bottom, I'm just going to line this up. I'm just going to line it up where I line up the edge of that foam and the bevel that I've cut. With the edge of the mount board. So in this case, I've stuck foam on, but this whole piece is now about 5mm wide as a bevel. A bevel runs in this way. And on this corner you can just see here, the bevel cuts back in on itself, so I've undercut the bevel that way. Now this is the first piece of the pinwheel extension. And what would happen is we take on each successive piece, and I'd need to put a bevel. I'm just going to have to get a little bit of board to cut on. Normally I have a grayer one so that you can see we might get a little bit of white fright here. And so I'm going to set this little tool up on a 45-degree angle, and I just want to set the depth actually to cut through the foam itself. Now I'm just going to use, I've actually got a square here, a little plastic one. Normally I would use a steel square, but I've just seen that on the shelf, which will actually help me. And I want to draw a line on here so that I can get my 90-degree. And so this piece is actually going to come and sit up onto that edge there. And so what I want to do is undercut that. And so I'm going to put my ruler just on the line there, and using my cutter on a 45-degree angle, I'm going to come in and cut that down on that 45 degrees. It's a little bit deep for me, but we'll just bring it up. So what I've done there, I've just cut an undercut 45, and then this 45-degree piece on the end is going to butt up against that bevel, and that's going to enable us to bring the piece along and make the next section of bevel. And so we're going to work all our way around the board. In fact, I just stuck that on a little bit crooked. I want to move it over a little bit. Double-sided tape's quite aggressive. So this is why it's called a pinwheel, because this section sticks out. And what you do is you work around the board, adding these extension pieces. Now you can always do that. You can do the extensions with coloured boards too, and this is a little secret. If you need to mount, or if you haven't got a particular coloured mat board and you just want a small strip of colour to show, you can use this type of pinwheel extension to add a layer of coloured mat board inside the other board. So you can see now it's sticking out on two angles. We're going to work around the next one again. And same thing, we're going to take our next bevel that we have cut, and we want him to come in here, so we're going to have to cut a bevel there. And in fact we can use that one on that end. Just see if I've got one here that's already got the angle. There we go. So this is going to be the next one. I'm going to stick the next one here. A little bit of double-sided. In fact, I'll put double-sided on both sections on the back right now. So it doesn't always show up great with the white backing against the white mat board. Anyway, we're going to peel that one. So I've just used a couple of pieces. And sometimes this is easier than cutting a really thick board if you want to get that wide bevel look. Can be difficult when depending on the machine, you've got some of the computer cutters don't even like cutting that thick board particularly because it's rather tough on the machine. And now our last piece, and I'm going to cut the end of the bevel of this one because we've got a bevel there. We're going to want to cut that one just there like that. It's the same thing, I'm just going to make a little mark. My 90-degree angle. In fact, I'm going to use just the scrap piece of the end there to put it on. Might drop that blade down just a little tad. It's quite deep. For just that's better. And so another 45-degree angle there. That one, I've peeled that. Just peel that one off. It's the last side. And so I'm going to stick that piece on the last side there. And that marries up. So when we've gone all the way around, a bit ahead of myself. when we go all the way around, now see how these boards stick out like this? This is this pinwheel type extension. And we can trim off these extra bits, but what we've ended up with is a really quite wide bevel on the inside of that mount board there, which is good. Now I'm just going to trim that up. I'm going to use I'll use my Stanley knife, and you can trim just along that edge without a ruler. I'm putting a ruler on there just so that I don't slip onto the mat board. That one needs to be a little bit sharper, that's better. So I'm just trimming off these pieces that are the pinwheel extension pieces. Sometimes you'd cut that already to length, but I find it easier to trim it off after you've actually put the whole thing on the board. That way you end up with something that's very, very flush. So it's almost like when you build a mount board spacer, except in this case you're or a foam board spacer I should say, in this case you're actually seeing the bevel hanging out of the piece. Yeah, so when we look there, that's given us our bevel, and we're on our thick board. So for one thing, if you just needed to make a fat or thick, wide beveled board, that's an easy way to do it. Sorry, excuse me. Easy way to do it from just using foam board cut on a 45-degree angle, or you could use mat board, extra pieces. Now, on here we're going to mount our fabric. I'm just going to put a little bit of brown paper down on my bench, and the reason for this is we're going to use a little bit of a wet glue in this example. And as I mentioned before, the glue that we're going to be using is an EVA adhesive. And so into my tub, I'm just going to put a little bit of this. Now some people would use a hot glue. We might put more in if we need more. Some people would use a hot glue and actually use it in one of their hot press. If you're a professional framer and you're actually using a hot press type machine, you may actually use the hot glue. But in this example, what we're doing is we're going to be using a wet glue and manual system. I'm just going to be using a little hand roller, and I'm going to apply glue to the surface of this board. Now, it doesn't really matter what colour it is. I've picked a grey today purely because the grey shows up a little bit better on the screen. And then I've also got a few pieces of just a suede, like this is an imitation suede fabric. It's in this sort of bluey grey colour. We had some of this left over from a job that we had for a client recently who particularly wanted that colour because that matched the furniture that they had. So, you know, it wasn't so much to match the artwork, but they wanted something that actually matched the furniture, and so we used that particular suede. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to glue this first of all onto the face of the board. So we'll just hop back on overheads, and if you've got any questions, by the way, while we're going, just type them into the chat, and I'll try and every now and then I try to have a little bit of a look over onto the chat itself and just see, well, where are we? Oh, don't know why it doesn't like me on the overhead now. It's quite funny how sometimes when I try to swap cameras, it doesn't always let me do what I want to do with some of this stuff. So let's just see if we can go back there. There we go. So onto the face, I'm just going to actually roll this glue out. So I want to get a little bit of a even coating. So glue up onto the roller. Now I haven't put any water or anything into this glue. I don't want it to be particularly runny, and I don't want to use, I only want to use enough really to put the coating on that I require, rather than having a huge amount of glue on there. So I haven't put a lot of glue, but I've got it fairly even, and then I'm going to apply to my mat board. I've got to just be careful because I'm going to get a bit of glue onto the paper. So just an even coat of glue up on that board. Give it a little bit off there. Now there's no glue on the bevel at this stage. I don't really want to glue the bevel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the fabric on and stick it into place. I'm just smoothing down with my hand. You see, once I get it even and level. Now this, I've made this fabric bigger than the piece of board that's underneath there. Once I've got that smoothed out, I'm going to take my other roller, and you could use a press if you have a press. I'm just using my little anti-static roller that I had there because it was quite handy, and it enables me to put a decent bit of pressure just to get that fabric glued onto the board itself. So some people would stick the fabric on and then actually cut the window, but in this case what I've done, I've stuck the board on. I already had the window cut there, and you can see we've got the board stuck on to our mat. Now what I do is I flip it over, and then on the back here we're gonna trim it, and this is how you get this this edge. Now you don't really need to use a ruler, although some people would use a ruler. But what I'm going to do is cut a little diagonal across here. In fact, I'll use the ruler just to get the angle. And where I'm coming from is I come from the corner of the board. So I really want to have that roughly at that 45-degree angle. And I've just put my knife in right into the corner there and come along and just cut through just smoothly towards the center of the fabric. I come to the other corner and I'm going to cut from that into the center. And likewise on the other corners. You may be able to see the actual pinwheel extension cut joins here. You can do this without putting that extension on, by the way. This was just because I wanted to get a bigger bevel, and I also wanted to give you that technique at the same time, because it's a handy one for building up depth in your frames and your mounting. So I've basically cut the corners of this fabric. I'm going to cut just through the center there. Now these pieces here are what is going to fold over into the back of the board itself, and that will enable us to tuck that over and glue it onto the back of the board. And so we're going to end up having a nice beveled edge, and also have this clean in the corner. Now you may not need all those pieces. I'm not going to. I could use wet glue there again. I'm just going to put some double-sided tape on here just for speed today, so that we can just show you how that gets held there. You do want to glue it on the back, and then we'll trim the front section down to the edge of the board. You can have a look at how we do that. So I'll just put double-sided. You could come back and use wet glue there. This is just so that I can pop it on and hopefully hold it straight up. Just flick this one over a tick. So I can see I've got a few of you guys there. Rick, got the regulars, hey Rick, Sue, Yvonne, Peter. All the, must be in the right time zone for me to catch you guys on here live, which it's good to see you all. So I'm just going to fold that over. I'm just going to stick that on with that onto that double-sided tape. So this is just so that this is going to hold the back edge. And now this edge here, the outside, the rough piece that I've got, I'm just going to trim that off right now. And I'm going to trim it off face down. I think I'm going to be able to run my ruler straight along. I've got a little bit of excess there which I want to get rid of anyway, which is that from the back. And then I'm just going to come down and try and cleanly cut that edge. You could fold and wrap the outside edge if you're worried about any fraying or anything going on the external side of the board. You could fold this edge over and stick it on the back as well, but I'm just going to trim it off. It would go into the frame and into a rebate. I don't think we have too many issues. Just cut that, the long bit there. The excess off there. We get this last piece off and we'll have a little bit of a look at how it looks. So with a with just your straight rectangular opening, you can get away with this. Sorry, a little bit rough there. We don't need that one. And that's all our scrap. Now some people have put a fillet on this as well on the inside. Let's get that bit off. So what we've done, we've wrapped our board and get all the dust off there. We've actually come in and we've got a pretty good bevel on the board coming into the piece. So that is technique number one for achieving a fabric wrapped bevel. And whether you want to have that sort of wide bevel or whether you just want to use it on a standard mat board or even have a straight cut there and then apply a fillet on the edge, it's quite a good method for getting an acceptable board in a colour with a fabric or actually with a paper surface that you might need. So we're going to move on pretty quickly today. From here, I'm just going to give a quick demo on what would happen if we were going to do an oval, because the oval is fairly similar, but we make the cuts in a different way. With the oval board, I've pre-cut an oval so that we don't have to sit there and look at me cut oval mat. Going to put a little bit more glue on this one. So straight in. Try to work quickly on this one for you guys. Actually, that's nice and even. Just want a little bit down that other edge there. Just one little lump we don't want. Got to be careful when you're working with a fabric that you don't get glue on the face side of your mat. It's a little bit awkward or difficult to get any glue off, so try to keep the actual face clean. So in this case, fabric's going to go on. I'm going to get rid of this brown paper so that we don't get any more on there. Fabric on, just smooth it out. Same thing. I'm going to hit it with a roller. This is just to get that fully bonded. You probably could leave the fabric to dry on there before you move on to the next step, but I'm just going to move straight in and cut the next one. Now also with this external piece, this time we're going to get rid of the paper because we've got a bit of glue on that this time. What I'd like to do is come back in. I'm going to flip it straight over and cut this excess off this time. I don't really want the external section in the way, so I'm not putting a ruler on there. I'm just being a bit risky, cutting straight up against the edge of the mat board. Hopefully it works. We're fairly good there. Yeah, there's a risk here that I peel off some off the front, which is just because we're wanting to get through it quickly. If in doubt, put the ruler up against it. Just going to cut that excess there, just to get rid of that, and cut this last side. So what we've got there, we've stuck our board. I've just trimmed it to the edge, and the difference with cutting with doing an oval, and same thing at this point, often we'd use one of the double-sided guns, but I'm going to use the hand-applied stuff because I've got it here with me, and I'll put it straight on right now. And I'm just going to run around and apply double-sided tape around the inside of this bevel. Now, glue is a good idea here. I'm just again using double-sided tape because it's going to be a little bit quicker to demonstrate. Now, I'm putting a few little pleats in this as I go, just so that I can follow. So I can follow the edge of the down there. Follow the edge of the bevel. Now I'm on the back of the board, just running around. And you may need to put pieces a little bit further back, and you can also tape over this afterwards with a little bit of hinging tape if you need to hold extra pieces. Or of course, if you've glued it, just use the glue. Now I'm not going to peel that double-sided off just yet. What I need to do is make a series of cuts, and depending on how wide the bevel is and how fine the fabric is, you may or may not, you may be able to space these 10, 15, 20 mil apart. But I'm going to cut reasonably close together, so all I'm going to do is make a little slice and slice into the middle here, and then about 20 millimeters, I should say, along, and I cut a little diamond. It's the same sort of thing. I'm cutting actual triangles here out from the bevel, and you'll get the idea once you see the pieces that fall out here. That one can be a bit bigger because we're near a straighter section of the board. Where the board curves a lot, you actually want to have the cuts closer together, and where the board is straighter, you can have the cuts further apart. It's just so that it folds nicely around the bends. And so this is looking rather ragged, but what we're doing is we're cutting out, you can see there, these sorts of sections, rather little triangular pieces all the way around. In fact, I'm going to try and just bring that one over there. It saves a little bit of work if I just cut that one. Make a big one there. That one can be quite big. And you see a lot of, again, old pictures that would have had, say, suede or velvet type borders on them. And this is a useful technique for when you've got to do that, replicate that old sort of family photograph look where they had that, that fabric feel. Again, I'm just using the blue because I happen to have it ready. So you can see here I've cut all these little sections. Here's the face, so you can see through there. That's what that oval looks like from the front at this stage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel off this double-sided tape that I'd applied here. And also, you know, if you could use, let's say I could use wet glue here. I probably should have just used the wet glue. Getting it off where there's a few little pleats. I sort of pleated this tape as I was going so that we ended it up close to the bevel. And then what you do is you just pull. I'll take that one out of the way, you might be able to see it on there. You're going to pull those pieces of fabric and pull it over and stick it on that piece of double-sided. Or if you had wet glue there, you'd be sticking it to the wet glue. But I find it quite easy using that double-sided tape. And you're trying to pull the fabric up to the bevel, pull it over and tuck it on the back. Little furry bit there. You've got to be a little bit careful that you don't fray it when you're working. Again, I'm sort of working more for speed, I guess, than care today. So now it looks like a lovely little star on the back. And in fact, I would tape over this with some hinging tape. I'm just going to put some brown tape on there just to hold these pieces down. The ends of them, they're actually stuck here, but I just want the little ends here to just be held down so that I can flip it over to show you. So I'm just using some backing tape. I'm going to put a couple of pieces here, we'll come down there and hold that little lot there. Well, now again, if you've got to make it archival, either put another mat board on the back of this piece to separate your fabric from the artwork. So mine looks a little bit dog's dinnery where you can see me taping over things. But that's just going to hold that in position. Get rid of those little bits on the end, we don't need them hanging over the front. So I've just taped that on. We'll have a little look at where we are. So what we've got, get the dust off. That's a little tip, although you probably, you don't want to do this while the piece is still wet, but often we'll use a little bit of actual masking tape or backing tape itself and just put that onto your fingers, you know, make a little loop like this, and you can use that to pick up the dust, and you can actually go round, and sometimes we do that to actually get the pattern of the suede boards all even, apart from getting the dust off, because obviously there's dust on things. That one needs to be pulled under a little bit more there. I can feel it. I can see it and feel it where I haven't cut them narrow enough. But you get the general idea here that when you need to do an oval, you cut your little triangles, you pull them, and you fold them over into the back surface. So that's your oval mat. Now, the last one we're having a look at today, I'm going to run through it pretty quickly. If there's any questions, please type them in the chat, or you can always email me later if you're watching this back on replay, or if you think of something after you've watched it and you want to know what's going on. Now, in this example, I have cut 2 mat boards, and we're going to show you how we do a large bevel mat board, or a soft bevel mat board in a way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick these 2 boards together. In some circumstances, what they would do is they would actually space these 2 boards apart to create this larger bevel. And I'm just going to stick the 2 together, and we're going to put double-sided tape to hold them together. And then we're going to go back and we're going to use some wet glue again. Oh, one thing about your wet gluing is you definitely want to either put some weight on your boards while they dry, because you don't want them to buckle. And usually you'd put your some weight on top of the board itself, and then you'd be able to keep them flat until they've had a chance to settle down. So in this case, I'm sticking on the mat, or sticking the 2 mats together. So this is just like a double mat. I've got it cut double mat, and I've got there the 10mm gap between the 2 mat boards. On the surface of this, and again coming back to the wet glue, bit of wet gluing today. Wet gluing is what we're using. And what I've done, I've also got myself a piece of watercolour paper. Now this one here is 185 gram watercolour paper, and it's just a cold pressed one. But you can use a rough paper, you can use a smooth paper, you can use a heavier weight version. But what we're going to do is we're going to bond this one on here, and in this case, when we cut it, and I'll just show you, we'll get some glue on there and get it on. That when we actually cut this, we're going to wet the paper. And watercolour paper, if you've ever seen watercolour artists stretch their watercolour paper, they will usually wet the paper and stick it down to a board, stick it around the edge, and when the paper dries, it stretches and it flattens itself out. Well, when you do a mounting board like this with the watercolour paper on here, what you can do is you can stick the paper on, and you can actually wet the watercolour paper, and the watercolour paper will shrink as it dries. And now you do need to sort of, I've used a heavier weight mount board here. I've used some of the Artique sort of 4-ply rag board. It's actually a museum mount board. It's a bit heavier than the normal paper itself, normal mat board itself. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick this on. I just was looking there if there was anything. I've cut this to size, although you could overlap it as I did the other ones and then trim it later. But I've just cut that to size already, and I'm going to mount it down again using the roller. So this is hard on. And yeah, I hadn't ever seen this technique used by anyone. I've seen how they originally used it, but I have been asked on occasion to replicate this design for works that have been going to auction, and the mount board itself might have aged, and they've wanted to copy the actual style that was on there, because you know, they obviously want to not necessarily pass it off as original, but they'd like it in as original condition as possible. And so on the back here, I'm just going to trim it, and it's the same sort of thing. We're going to trim in from the edge, so much how we trimmed before. This time I'm going to freehand it, and I'm just going to come not quite to the point of the V, because we just want to stretch it down So again, like we did with the rectangular board, except in this example I'm going to cut out that little window section. So we get rid of that. So you can see here what I've done. I've cut these flaps in the corner. I'm going to also put some glue. I wonder if I put glue. I'll use double-sided again just for speed, and I don't want to get any on the back here. But glue will work better because the glue over the drying time of the watercolor paper tends to go with the paper itself, or dry with the paper itself. So much how you would stretch a watercolor paper using gummed paper tape as opposed to sticky tape, the gummed paper tape dries at the same sort of rate as the watercolor paper, and so they both end up bonding and sticking together. So hopefully this will work just with the double-sided to show you. And then I'd usually use a sponge here, but I was looking for my watercolor sponge out the back and I couldn't see it, so all I did was I brought a little brush with some water, and I've cut these pieces of paper. And now what I want to do is just dampen this mat board. Now they'd probably wet the whole surface. I would anticipate that when they went to do their mounting in the first place, they wet the paper and mounted the board, or wet the whole surface with a sponge before they actually glued it down. Now I'm going to come over and wet it now, but it should have been moist prior to the wet mounting. But again, that's just so that I'm going to end up with an even moisture content on that paper, because I want it to all shrink at the same time. And so what I've got this wet, and then I've just got these pieces that are damp, and you can see they're actually folding in, and then they're going to come over, and in fact I should put that paper back down just to keep it clean on the front. It's going to come back over, and we're going to tuck it onto the back of that board, and I'm going to stick it to the double-sided tape that I had there. But this is why you can see using the wet glue on the back is also a good idea, because I've got a moist board here, moist paper. And I guess these sort of techniques, framers must have thought, wow, how can we get either a beveled look, or how can we achieve some? They may have only had access to they may not have had access to say a really good white board, and they may have wanted to paint a watercolor wash like the line and wash type of mat boards. And so you think, oh, how did they come up with this idea for getting the bevel this way? But what ends up happening is, as this it's subtle, and you may not be able to see it as it's actually happening. But what happens is this board is going to dry, and along this edge, I'll see if I can just hold it up to the camera, just maybe you can see, what you end up with is this very gentle bevel, and it actually looks like a shadow. So when it's finally dry and shrunk, this paper will pull itself, and I'm going to push along that line. This paper will pull itself tight across the step, and so as that paper at the moment is expanded because it's moist, and then as the moisture comes out of the paper and it dries, you're going to end up with this large, wide bevel on it. So a little bit different than your normal mounting process, but something that if you ever come across, if you ever find that if you ever find that you have to replicate one of those mat boards, that's the technique that I've used in the past to give me that shallow bevel, and it's sort of, you'd notice it's we've seen it mostly on antique things, and it always seems that there must have then got to a point where then picture framers might have started to use either rulers and blades and got better quality boards and started to actually cut beveled boards, or whether it was actually artists had thought, oh, how can I make a border around my work, and then they would possibly paint line and wash work on there, but you still got that really nice subtle lead in to the artwork. So really that was pretty much, I know it's a quick one today. Sometimes we have some really intense training. These ones are just 3 simple little techniques. Just wanted to knock them off so that you guys have got a bit of an idea that you can apply both paper and fabric to matboard surfaces. You can use, if you're using watercolor paper, you can moisten it and actually have it go down, and I suggest you try that, because it's really quite an unusual effect, and you don't see it so often. You don't see modern frame shops necessarily using that, but I think on some work it could really be quite a nice addition, and certainly then that would take really nice line and wash work well. So a good one for watercolor and etching. And then if you need to use fabric in the sense of making an oval without, you could glue on and cut, and you'd have your white bevel, but there's always a risk that the fabric frays. I find with some of the professionally made mats, you have some of the silks and things, it is tricky to actually cut it well. So this method of applying and folding the fabric around is a reasonably sound method to be able to do that fabric wrap. You could also use that just if you wanted a solid fabric background. And then the first one that we did was, of course, the one with the pinwheel extension. Now, whether you do fabric on that large bevel to do the pinwheel, or whether you just use the pinwheel design to make thick mat boards, keep that one in mind if you ever need to make a thick board. Now, I'd really appreciate if for any time you need anything covered in Framers Club training, please always send me an email, say, look, I'm looking at doing this. Certainly this is how I've got in touch, or how Mariana has got in touch with me from Brazil. She actually needs to learn the software. She's bought a great computerized mat cutting machine, and yet they don't really have too many instructions. The help files, some of them are in Italian, even some of the English descriptions of things doesn't really give you a clear understanding, and so I'll be working through doing a little bit of training for her with using Valiani machine, and you're more than welcome. I will publish when we're doing that. It may be early in the morning my time, or late in the afternoon, so it could be that sort of 6 or 7 o'clock at night, or 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning for you guys, depending on where you are. And you're more than welcome to join me on that training, but that's something specific that she's asked for. And of course, if you ever have any need for some specialised training, just let me know, because other members also have an interest. So if there aren't any questions, you guys have all been pretty quiet today. I can see that there's a few people on, but not a lot of chatter. Whereas often we get a lot of chat and people saying, oh, could I do this? Now, if you're not a member of the Framers Club, I would really encourage you to hop on over to framersclub.com, and there's a little thing, find out more, and just join, because then that you get access to past content and all future content that we make, and that resource is building and building and building, And as we go on, we're then taking that to another level, which is Master Framer Academy, where we're going to be doing diploma training. So it's more aimed at people in the industry. But if you're interested in heading down that path, or if you're already a professional framer and you just want to have more interaction, or if you need someone to call up and say, hey Dave, I've got this little problem, what are your ideas on it? Or, you know, how do you think you could help? You know, or is this a good idea? I'm always happy to answer your email and get back to you. So I'll just have a quick look. If there's any questions, I'd suggest we pop them in now, because we're going to pretty much wrap it up today. It's not been a huge long, like sometimes these run well into 2 hours, but I'm due to head off for a quick week's break next week. And so I'm going to really, I've got to go and pack because we're leaving fairly soon. And so I couldn't really do a great, huge, long training today. But what I would say, happy to do other training for you guys throughout. And if you've got any questions, shoot me an email. I'll try to answer them for you. And please, if you're looking at like the edited high definition videos are different than, even though the content may be the same, they are different than what we have that goes live. Because when it's live, you get the camera switching that I do, and you actually get the interaction if you use the chat function. But when we edit, we're editing like high definition other footage, and so we're able to zoom in and do close-ups on specific areas that we can't really show you terribly clearly on the live cast. So, you know, later on, if you ever need to get it, like, you can always hop in, and you'll find what happens is those replays that have been in there that have been just replays of the live stream are now being replaced with replays in high definition. So they're much larger files, much better. You'll be able to put them on a big screen and you have no fuzziness, and you're able to see the details of what I do there. So if there aren't any questions, I'll sort of be signing off, and we'll see you next month on the Framers Club. So I'll hang on just for a couple of seconds if there's anything else there, and if you haven't, if you have questions or suggestions for future training, just either pop them in the chat or shoot them over by email. So I'll just have a quick check. I can see. Thanks, Rick, Yvonne, Peter. Thank you for coming. It's really good that you attend. I know I've got regulars that are here every time on the live, and then often I'll have 20, 30, 40 people watching the replay from now till tomorrow, even the next couple of weeks. And usually what happens is I get all the feedback then as everybody goes through and sort of digests what we've just done. But yeah, if there's ever anything I can do to help you, please drop me an email. That's probably the best one. Is contact, CONTACT, at fixaframe, fixaframe.com.au. That one is probably the best one that pops up for me at work. And you can also send things through the Framers Club website. There's a contact form, and also through Easy Home Framer, some people who do just the basic training. But if you ever want to take it further, just let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you. So anyway, I look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Yvonne. We'll catch you next month. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.